Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Richard Allen Turner. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. Welcome to my channel, Kids Info Network Dayton. I hope you enjoy the show. Focus Kids is coming right up. Hey everyone, welcome back to Focus Kids. I have Dr. Ed Tronick and Dr. Claudia Gold back, and we are going to talk about authoritative versus authoritarian parenting styles. So, Dr. Gold, what's the difference? Authoritarian versus authoritative parenting styles.
Well, authoritarian is sort of classically referred to as the my way or the highway form of parenting. And authoritative is a much more rich, complex concept. And this idea that a parent speaks from a place of authority. That doesn't mean controlling or rigid or inflexible, but it's very closely linked with the idea of several other concepts: self-efficacy, confidence, agency. And when a parent interacts with a child from a position of authority, which is really meant to be a very positive concept, it helps the child to develop their own self-regulatory capacities. And that's really what this is all about, because that's so central to a child's ability to be in relationship to other people and to learn and grow in healthy ways. So that's what authoritative parenting is.
Dr. Tronick, how does authoritative parenting better foster relationship growth, development, and self-esteem over that of an authoritarian style?
I think the authoritative parenting style allows the child to have their own sense of efficacy and agency in a situation, and it's one that's associated with maybe underlying it is a kind of negotiation process, a kind of process of match and mismatch. It's finding what it is that both allows the child to move forward, but also in consort or in synchrony with what the parent wants. Whereas the authoritarian approach, and not to over characterize it, is one where the agenda comes from the parent, and there's little room for any agency or taking some level of control by the child. So the mismatch repair, unless the child just goes along with what the parent was demanding of them, that's their only option in the sense for repairing what might be a mismatch between what they want to do and what the parent wants to do. And I think the general thought about it, or one general thought about it, is that over time the authoritative child internalizes and takes on the values that the parent is bringing to them, whereas in the authoritarian style, the values, the way of being is something in some sense that's separate from the child. It's something that the child knows that they have to do that, but they do it in the context of feeling worried or threatened that if they don't do it, they're going to be getting into trouble.
And what can parents do to adjust, or how can we help parents adjust from a more authoritarian to a more authoritative style? And should we even do that? Should they consider rethinking an authoritarian style?
Um, I think the roots lie in the value of feeling listened to. So we learn to listen by being listened to. So I find that parents often come in and say, "He never listens. Tell me what to do to make him listen." And there's a kind of feeling of assault of a child who doesn't listen to you. And often that has very deep roots in the parent's life of not having been listened to, whether it's by their own parents, by their partner, by their colleagues. So when a parent feels that they have been listened to, they're much freer to be able to listen to their child. Now, that doesn't mean it's an equal negotiation. So I want to highlight that the authoritative parent is also the one who's in charge, because a child likes to feel that their parent is in charge. They don't like to feel like it's just an equal negotiation, because they need to learn and they need to feel safe from their own big emotions that they haven't quite yet learned how to manage. So I think it all comes down to listening to parents in order to support their ability to listen to their child.
And Dr. Gold, in general, can you talk about outcomes with each of these styles in children? And it varies certainly from individual to individual, but in general, what would you say the outcomes are between authoritarian versus authoritative styles?
It is very general, what I will say, because there's tremendous variation. But in general, when a person has had a predominantly authoritarian experience, I would link it with what Ed just said, is that it's difficult to internalize the ability to go through the mismatch and repair with other people. So they only have, if they've only experienced a parent who is right and doesn't give them any kind of sense of agency, then they will then bring that pattern of interaction to other relationships, which inhibits their ability to be close with other people. It leads to rigidity and inability to find meeting of minds with other people. So in contrast, when a child has had the experience of being heard, then they, in relation to other people in their lives, can be open to people who are different or disagree with them, and to be able to take in another person's perspective.
Dr. Tronick?
The model that we have, the idea of the messiness of interactions, the mismatch that we talk about. A key point about that is that out of that messiness, you can create something different and something new, and that you need the messiness, it could be this way, it could be that way, it could be this way. All of these possibilities allow for a kind of repair process which sorts through to find an effective way of, say, fitting together with the parent or doing something back at school. So the authoritative parenting style embeds this kind of messiness in the interaction. It leaves space open for the child to work on a particular issue. It leaves space open for the parent and the child to work on the issue. So there's a flexibility that comes with that kind of experience. Whereas the authoritarian parent is one that limits the possibilities and that decreases or limits that experience of messiness and flexibility. And that, I think that becomes also, either one becomes a style by which you make meaning in the world. It certainly influences how you then parent your own child.
How can an authoritarian style of parenting disrupt development of a child and and how can that be problematic down the road as an adult?
Yeah, so I think it is potentially problematic, but there are always ways in which we can shift those problematic meanings. But the problem can be that if the child doesn't have any experience of a caregiver being curious about what their behavior is communicating, and only experiences kind of being shut down or managed, or in even worse case scenario, because sometimes these things do go hand in hand with discipline in the form of shame or humiliation. These kinds of things, which can be part of authoritarian parenting, not always, but they can be, those kinds of qualities of shame and humiliation really have risk of very significant long-term negative impacts on how a child makes meaning of themselves in the world, and in turn then goes on to interact with other people.
Dr. Tronick?
I too would like to be careful about how we frame this. In my experience, we can overcharacterize, or we can make something really extreme. You know, on one side, the authoritarian parent can be seen as a kind of, you know, punitive operating dictator. On the other side, you can take the authoritative parent and get into the parent who engages kind of in a lot of laissez-faire and not providing any kind of structure around the child. And most parents play it out in the middle. And there are times that probably everyone or most people are authoritarian. This is the way it's going to be. And there are other times that they're much more authoritative in the way they are. And there are differences in terms of long-term development, but the valuation of that within the typical range, and I can't emphasize enough how wide that range is and how varied that experience is. It's not as if there's one perfect way to be, although people sometimes argue for that. And authoritarian parents will argue this is the perfect way to be, and the authoritative parent will argue that way. But probably in reality, everybody's engaged in a variety of ways of being with their child. And you give the child opportunities sometimes, and other times you stop them from doing something. And in part, our focus and what Claudia did in her book, Keeping the Child in Mind, is, I think, a critical part, be it authoritarian or authoritative or whatever, is to try and get a sense of what you're doing means to, and how they're going to be able to use that information. And sometimes an authoritarian boundary is really useful. My telling my daughter, for example, no, when she was 14, no, you can't go to that party. There was no negotiation, although generally I was pretty authoritative or open to negotiation. But my bet was that she had ambivalence about going to that party, that it was something that might be a little bit too much for her. And so my authoritarian statement, you can't go, period, end of story, allowed her to both protest me and feel more comfortable.
So may I introduce a little bit of a mismatch here for fun? because I, in my view, and this is something about language, I actually really love the word authority, because I think it encompasses a lot of things, and you kind of have a sense of speaking from a place of authority that includes both limit setting and flexibility. And so that So what you've been describing in my view is kind of like authoritarian versus permissive. And I think authoritative kind of incorporates both of those things into one concept. So anyway, I just said that that's, I think we're saying the same thing, but using just different words.
So this wasn't in my questions, but it kind of leads me, you know, we often think of authoritarian as just purely bad and just bad, and authoritative is purely good. So how can purely authoritative parenting be problematic? Dr. Gold first.
Well, this is a very interesting conversation, and I think a lot of it is about language. I think when a person acts from a place of authority, that is always a good thing. It basically means to being rooted in your sense of self and in your role, and feeling solid from that place. And then the way you behave can be a whole variety of things, from setting firm limits to having flexibility, to even making a mistake and changing your mind and saying, okay, well, that didn't work out, so I'm going to do something different. So I would say that idea of having your own authority and speaking, it's really similar to the idea of speaking with your own voice, is wholeheartedly a positive thing. Whereas authoritarian, without uncompromising, rigid, controlling, again, has some benefits in certain times, but if that's the exclusive experience of the child, then that is problematic.
Yeah. And I agree. There are times where a parent just has to draw the line and say, no, this is the way it's going to be. But there also has to be that flexibility to, in different situations, you know, give some age-appropriate choices and some age-appropriate negotiations. So I think that's all I have. Any final thoughts for authoritarian versus authoritative parenting?
My thought is, again, that for the most part, parents vary. Our whole idea about messiness and mismatches also applies to what Claudia is saying, that one having authority is, another way to put it is that you have a really clear sense of yourself and what it is that you're doing, and an awareness of yourself. And I expect that the phenomenon that even myself, who has a perfect sense of self, at times it varies. And sometimes I feel like I have a really clear sense of self, and other times I act in ways which probably reflect a disruption of that sense of self. Again, it's part of the problem is how we're colonized, or we're caught up by our use of language. So we say authoritarian and we say authoritative. We say a sense of authority. And it seems like these are fixed entities. But for me, most of these entities are highly variable, and that they're changeable. And that to perhaps overstate it, it's essentially almost impossible to be absolutely consistent, to have a sense of self that always feels, like, oh, I really know what I want. I'm really, able to be, have a sense of authority. And during this pandemic, I'm willing to bet that everybody's sense of self is showing, a little more Swiss cheese kind of effect than we saw before. And everyone's is a bit messier than it was before. And so that's what we have to try to keep in mind in terms of being open to different possibilities and different ways of being.
Yeah, I totally agree. So this is where we have the repair, because we're really talking about the same thing, that while the sense of authority is something that is really powerfully growth promoting, it's hard to hold on to that as a parent. And I'm not sure if it's in this book, but maybe it's in the Developmental Science of Early Childhood. I ask about, well, what causes a parent to lose their natural authority? Mm-hmm. And that's things like being in a pandemic, or being alone while your partner is at work all day and having 3 little kids, or being depressed, or having a physical illness, that things happen to parents that result in their losing that sense of authority. And so in order to help families, we need to look at that and then do what we can do to regain that sense of authority, which then rights the ship that's sort of been tossed about by life experience.
Yeah.
Thank you both very much once again for being on the show. That's another episode of Focus Kids. I'll be back with final thoughts in just a moment. And now for my final thoughts. How we parent our children can affect how a child sees him or herself in the world and how they interact in future relationships. Too much "it's my way or the highway" parenting can be problematic for a child. Too passive or not setting enough boundaries can also be problematic. Fortunately, most parents balance firm, non-negotiable, "no, you can't do that" in some circumstances, and some age-appropriate back and forth negotiation in other circumstances. A healthy balance of letting a child make age-appropriate, parent-supervised decisions and mistakes while also establishing firm boundaries when necessary allows a child to grow and develop in a space where parents are in charge and remain the authority figure, but also allow a child to discover who they are as an individual, learn and grow from mistakes when they make them, and thereby giving them the tools and confidence to handle decision-making as adults. Don't forget to check out The Power of Discord by Dr. Ed Tronick and Dr. Claudia Gold. It's a great read for parents and professionals alike. And don't forget to check out the links below in the description to their other works as well. That's another episode of Focus Kids. If you like this video, hit the like and subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss an episode. I'm Dr. T, and we are out.